Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Welcome to Gospel Minded, where we spend a few minutes each week talking about psychology, our emotions, behavioral health, and we reflect on how these important topics are related to the gospel reading for each Sunday. Like I always point out, this isn't a substitute for actually getting to church or participating in counseling, therapy, spiritual direction if you're engaged in these sort of practices. But like we know so well, things of our psychology and our mind so often go beautifully hand in hand with our spirituality. If you're new here, welcome to Gospel Minded. If you are returning, welcome back. Either way, I hope that you'll hit subscribe so that you never miss an episode of Gospel Minded. Before we launch into the topic for today, I want to just address the fact that I'm wearing my poppy because it's the Sunday before Veterans Day. And so to all those who have served, to the families of those who have served, for those who have sacrificed so much to preserve our freedoms and our liberties, thank you. I hope that you have a blessed holiday weekend and a very happy Veterans Day. So, the gospel for today. We're moving along, getting closer to Advent and the new liturgical year, and we're still in Mark's gospel for now. And so we're in Mark chapter 12. Let me just read a little bit of it from today's passage. It says this: In the course of his teaching, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to go around in long robes and accept greetings in the marketplaces, seats of honor in synagogues, and places of honor in banquets. They devour the houses of widows and, as a pretext, recite lengthy prayers. They will receive a very severe condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and observed how the crowd put money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow also came and put in 2 small coins worth a few cents. Calling his disciples to himself, he said to them, "Amen, I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all the other contributors to the treasury, for they have all contributed from their surplus wealth, but she, from her poverty, has contributed all she had, her whole livelihood." Wow, so that's a meaningful gospel, and there's a lot there that we could talk about today. I can't help but think that were I a clergyman or a man of the cloth, that if I had the opportunity today to address the offering and talk about the importance of financial contributions because I was responsible for keeping a church afloat, that I might take that opportunity. Certainly a lot that can probably be said about trust. And here's this widow who is giving, everything that she has financial wise, trusting that she'll be okay. So I think that there's an avenue to talk about that. So some spiritually relevant topics for sure. Speaking about this psychologically, though, I want to highlight something that I thought was interesting from the gospel today, and that's that the author of this passage takes the trouble to highlight the widow. As a matter of fact, widow is used twice in the gospel. It talks about how the scribes devour the houses of widows, and then seeing this widow's contribution to the treasury, Jesus calls his disciples and instructs that this widow gave more than anybody else. Why is the widow relevant in the gospel today? Not just the gospel, even the first reading, if you were at Mass, highlighted the widow as well. So really, this theme of the widow is relevant and prevalent in the Mass today. Why? What is interesting about that? I think that, especially at the time of Jesus and in the Old Testament as well, if you were a widow, life was exceptionally challenging for you. And there were not parameters set up to really take care of these people, perhaps like you might find today, either with family or whatever. Life was really look different for you if you were a widow back in the time of Jesus. But here's the thing now, speaking about this psychologically. It didn't matter if you were a widow at the time of Jesus 2,000 years ago, or if you are a widow or widower in 2024. What we know is that that is a exceptionally challenging transition. If you are a widow or widower, there are some vulnerabilities that you are going to have in this new life. First of all, grief. You know, if you have lost a spouse, a partner, a loved one, uh, it makes perfect sense that grief can be one of the challenges that you are going to confront. And that's a reality, and it's not fun, but it's okay. That's part of the process of working through losing somebody that you have loved. And whether you were married or with somebody for a year or 60 years, there's going to be some grief. And there's no blueprint or strategy or playbook for what grief has to look like. No two people are going to process loss and grief the same way. But just know that if you have lost somebody, or if you have a family member who is aging and they are losing their spouse or partner, their husband or wife, that grief is going to be one of the things that is going to manifest itself very naturally. That makes sense. Another significant stressor for people who have lost their spouse is financial struggles. Now, I've observed this with patients of mine, some of whom have lost spouses pretty early in their marriage. One lost a husband after they'd been married just 15 years. Another person lost a spouse after just 5 years. And for that individual, that wife took care of so many aspects of the child rearing and child caring. And in both of those cases, and in so many others, when somebody becomes a widow or a widower, there is a new financial burden or financial strain. And it's never easy. I mean, we've talked about money on Gospel Minded before, but when we have financial stressors, it can impact a lot of areas of our functioning, increasing our anxiety, can increase our symptoms of depressive feelings. And if that's already coupled then with that grief that we're working through, those financial vulnerabilities can really be something to watch out for and be conscientious of. Social isolation. You know, if you have lost a spouse, partner, a loved one with whom you were so close and shared so much, it might be hard to take that step and transition to getting into a situation where you feel like you want to go out of yourself, to have connections with other people and not isolate. You know, I've known people who've lost loved ones, and while they were in the midst of intense grieving, while those wounds were still healing, that inclination for them was to pull back and retreat. And there was social isolation. Now, I'm not saying that, like I mentioned, there is no playbook for how you're supposed to grieve, but we do know that we are social beings. We're meant for communion, for connection, for intimacy. And when we deny ourselves that, um, it can be hard to really feel like we're flourishing, even if we are sad or distressed or upset by the loss of a loved one. Social isolation is a huge vulnerability if you are a widow or widower. It's just something to be aware of and conscientious of. Um, Nutrition and health is another significant vulnerability. You know, I think about my eating patterns and habits before I was married. It looked very different than after I got married, and especially now that I've got kids and a family. If my spouse, if my wife were to not be here tomorrow, I know that my eating habits would change. My diet would look very different and not for the better, and it would probably impact my health in a negative way. Now, I just think about that for me. the reality is that for so many people who become widows or widowers, their nutrition, their health really takes a hit. And that's not just my opinion. I mean, we know this from literature. The research says this is a significant vulnerability. Now, if you're older and you've lost a spouse, you want to be just so conscientious to take care of your health and guard it, as you do at any time in your life. But just knowing that nutrition and health is a big vulnerability and pitfall to being a widow or widower, it's helpful to have that awareness. And then I referenced this already. You know, if you are, whether you're old or young and you lose a spouse, your relationship to children as a parent is going to have to adjust, and you may have to make some changes. Um, and that's just a natural part of adjusting to a new life as a widow or widower. I referenced one of my patients who I'd worked with before who had not been married long, and this individual's wife died. So now all of a sudden, so many of her responsibilities towards the children fell onto this man who I was working with. And on top of the regular job that he had and the other responsibilities that he had personally and professionally, it was a big load that got dropped into his lap, coupled with the grief, the financial pressures, the social isolation, some of those other stressors now that we've already highlighted. It was a real challenge for him. So again, I think it's relevant for people today to hear. This gospel highlights the widow twice in the text today, because what we know is if we are connected to somebody, if we are entered into that covenant of marriage, somebody is going to go first, either me or my wife. Or if you're a woman, it's going to be either me or my husband. And that's a hard reality, and we're going to confront some of these same challenges that the widow in the gospel did. The good news is this: we know that these are the challenges to expect, and so we can work with friends and family to prepare for that, especially if we've got older family members. But the other good news is this, is that our Lord does not forget the widow. As a matter of fact, he highlights her as an image to emulate, that she gives out of her poverty because of her trust. And the Lord is not going to forget that widow, and neither will he forget you or your loved ones. If you are a widow or widower, or if you have an elderly parent who becomes a widow or widower, our blessed Lord will take care of you, and you can depend on my prayers and the prayers and help and support of so many others as well. So interesting topic for Gospel Minded today. I hope you found it helpful, and I hope you'll come back next week when we have another edition of Gospel Minded. Until then, let's keep one another in prayer, and I'll see you next time. I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer here at Gospel Minded. Take care.